May 15th, 1943, 2:47 p.m., Camp Atterbury, Indiana. Colonel Giovanni Battista stared in disbelief at the aluminum tray placed before him. A quarter-pound hamburger patty, golden French fries, and a vanilla milkshake so thick the straw stood upright. The mathematics were impossible. This single meal contained more protein than his entire regiment had seen in 2 weeks. Here's the twist everyone gets wrong about Italian POWs in America. They weren't just well-fed prisoners, they were accidentally discovering the American dream one meal at a time. Stay for the story of how hamburgers became the most powerful propaganda weapon America never intended to create. What Colonel Battista didn't know was that this moment would shatter everything he believed about warfare, economics, and what it meant to be civilized. The mathematics of American abundance were already written in the 2,147 calories he'd consumed that day. More nutrition than many Italian civilians saw in a week. One vanilla milkshake was about to rewrite his understanding of power. The US Army's standard POW ration represented something unprecedented in military history. 3,000 daily calories including fresh meat, dairy, and luxuries like ice cream. While Mussolini's forces had been rationing breadcrumbs and horse meat, Americans had created something that defied European comprehension. Here's what's insane about this. Among the 51,156 Italian prisoners who had passed through American camps were men who had become symbols of an impossible choice: return to a devastated homeland or stay in the land of endless hamburgers. But on May 15th, 1943, they were just hungry soldiers trying to process what they were seeing. Colonel Battista touched the cold glass of his milkshake and whispered to his aide, "Are we still at war?" This story reveals how industrial abundance defeated military conquest, and how Italy's confidence in European superiority turned to desperate longing when they discovered what American prosperity could really deliver. But wait till you see what happened when they got their first taste of ice cream for breakfast. The transport ships docked at Norfolk Naval Base carried more than prisoners. They carried men about to witness an economic miracle they had no framework to understand. Giuseppe Rinaldi, a sergeant from Naples who'd survived 2 years of British rations consisting of tinned sardines and hard biscuit, stepped off the gangplank expecting bread and water. Instead, he encountered Sergeant Mike O'Brien holding a clipboard and chewing something that smelled like heaven. "Welcome to America, boys. Chow's in 20 minutes, hamburgers, fries, and all the milk you can drink." O'Brien wasn't being generous. This was standard US Army protocol. POWs received the exact same rations as American GIs. The Geneva Convention required adequate food. America's definition of adequate was about to blow some minds. Rinaldi later wrote to his wife, "Maria, they feed us like kings feed their sons. Today I ate meat twice. Real meat, not the grey paste we called sausage. The bread is white as snow and soft as a baby's cheek. I fear I am dreaming, or perhaps I have died and gone to a capitalist heaven." Here's the crazy part. The hamburger patties served to Italian POWs were made from grade A beef, higher quality than most Italian civilians had access to before the war. Each prisoner received a daily protein allocation that exceeded the weekly rations of entire Italian families back home. This wasn't generosity. This was America operating at normal capacity. The numbers were impossible to process. 16 ounces of fresh meat per prisoner per day, unlimited bread, real butter, fresh vegetables, and dairy products, including— this broke their minds. Ice cream served as a regular dessert, not a once-a-year celebration. Private Antonio Salvatore from Sicily had never seen ice cream in his entire life. At age 24, he experienced his first vanilla cone on a Tuesday afternoon in Kansas because the mess hall had extra inventory. But this was just the beginning. Colonel Battista had served in North Africa, where Italian forces survived on 1,800 calories of pasta, olive oil, and whatever protein they could scavenge. He'd been briefed by Rome's intelligence services about American propaganda techniques, how they might use food as psychological warfare. The briefing prepared him for slightly better rations designed to make prisoners compliant. Nothing prepared him for abundance as a baseline condition. Born in Turin to a family of industrial engineers, Battista understood manufacturing. He'd toured Fiat factories, witnessed Italy's impressive pre-war production capabilities. His confidence in European industrial superiority was unshakable, until he saw the volume of food being delivered to a single POW camp. Truck after truck of fresh produce, meat, dairy, and processed foods arriving daily for just 3,000 prisoners. The colonel had a wife, Eleanor, and 2 daughters back in Turin. In his last letter before capture, he had assured Elena that Americans were industrially impressive but economically fragile. They cannot sustain a long war because their society is built on luxury, not necessity. He believed American abundance was a facade, a thin veneer over a system that would collapse under wartime pressure. Here's what changed everything. On his 3rd day at Camp Atterbury, Batista witnessed something that shattered his worldview. The guards were eating the exact same food as the prisoners. This wasn't special treatment for propaganda purposes. This was how Americans fed people, all people, enemy soldiers included. Batista had expected American guards to eat better food while prisoners received scraps. Instead, he discovered that the mess hall served one menu to everyone. GIs, POWs, civilian workers, everyone got hamburgers, everyone got milkshakes, everyone got ice cream for dessert. This was standard operating procedure, not psychological manipulation. The supply chain feeding Camp Atterbury revealed the terrifying scope of American industrial capacity. Every week, 47 refrigerated trucks arrived carrying 85,000 pounds of fresh beef, 12,000 gallons of milk, 8,500 pounds of cheese, and 3,200 gallons of ice cream. This was for one medium-sized POW facility. America was operating 511 such camps. But wait, it gets worse. The beef came from Nebraska ranches producing surplus cattle. The milk arrived from Wisconsin dairies that had increased production by 340% since 1941 without straining capacity. The ice cream was manufactured in nearby Indianapolis factories that considered military contracts a minor sideline to their civilian business. Private Salvatore couldn't comprehend the ice cream factory. In Sicily, his family had owned one cow shared between 3 households. At Camp Atterbury, prisoners consumed 400 gallons of ice cream weekly, more dairy than his entire village saw in a year. The factory that supplied this minor military requirement produced 50,000 gallons daily for civilian consumption. The hamburger patties revealed even more impossible mathematics. Each quarter-pound patty represented grain that could feed an Italian family for 2 days. But America was feeding this to prisoners while simultaneously exporting wheat to Britain, feeding its own population without rationing and maintaining strategic reserves. Sergeant Rinaldi wrote, "They throw away more food than we ever had. Yesterday I saw guards scraping uneaten hamburgers into garbage bins. In Naples, men would fight over such scraps." This wasn't just engineering, it was industrial warfare. America had weaponized abundance. While European nations calculated minimum calories for survival, America's baseline assumption was surplus. Their economy mode exceeded most nations' wartime maximums. The supply sergeant, a friendly corporal from Iowa named Jimmy Patterson, explained the system to curious Italian officers. "We got contracts with 847 farms in a 200-mile radius. Each farm produces surplus specifically for military needs, but it's maybe 15% of their total output. The rest feeds Chicago, Detroit, Indianapolis. We're not even trying hard yet." This casual revelation destroyed Colonel Batista's last hopes that American abundance was unsustainable wartime theatre. The numbers came in waves, each statistic more impossible than the last. Camp Atterbury's weekly food budget exceeded the entire quarterly food allocation for Rome's civilian population. America was operating 155 camps just for Italian POWs, each maintaining the same abundant standards. Daily consumption at a single camp, 85,000 pounds of food served to 3,000 prisoners. That's 28 pounds of food per person per day, including waste, preparation loss, and variety options. In Italy, civilian rations had dropped to 1.2 pounds of food per person per day, mostly bread and pasta. Here's what broke their calculations. The Americans weren't just feeding prisoners well, they were feeding them better than Italian officers had eaten during peacetime. Every POW consumed more protein in a week than most Italian civilians saw in a month. The vitamin content alone exceeded anything available in wartime Europe. Prisoner Giuseppe Romano, a former mathematics teacher from Florence, started calculating. If America can feed 51,156 Italian prisoners at this level while fighting a global war, what does that say about their total capacity? His numbers revealed a terrifying truth. America's POW feeding program represented less than 0.1% of their total food production capacity. The ice cream revelation broke their understanding completely. America produced 175 million gallons of ice cream in 1943, during wartime while rationing was supposedly in effect. Each Italian prisoner consumed more ice cream monthly than existed in all of pre-war Italy. This wasn't military necessity. This was casual abundance. Pattern interrupt. What happened next broke their calculations. Private Antonio discovered that American guards were complaining about the food. "This beef is tough," said Corporal Patterson, pushing away a steak that would have fed Antonio's family for 3 days. "Hope the mess sergeant gets some better cuts next week." The Italians realized they were witnessing complaints about food quality that exceeded their dreams of food quantity. This was a nation so abundant that its soldiers criticized the grade of luxury. Meanwhile, letters from home painted a devastating contrast. Colonel Battista received word from Turin. "The children ask about meat every day. Eleanor found some horse meat last week, the first protein in 10 days. We're grateful for what little we have, but the hunger is constant." Italy's industrial collapse became clear through personal correspondence. Sergeant Rinaldi's wife wrote, "The bakery closed permanently. No flour has arrived in 3 weeks. We make soup from potato peels and count ourselves fortunate." The twist that changed everything. While Italian families scavenged for potato peels, their captured soldiers were being served fresh vegetables flown in from California farms. The logistics alone defied comprehension. America was transporting perishable food across continental distances to feed enemy prisoners better than those prisoners' own families were eating. The strategic implications dawned slowly, then all at once. If America could maintain this level of abundance while simultaneously feeding Britain, Russia, and its own massive military expansion, what did that suggest about the war's ultimate outcome? Colonel Battista began studying camp supply manifests with the intensity he'd once reserved for tactical planning. Prison camp abundance wasn't propaganda, it was America operating at standard efficiency. The terrifying realization: America wasn't straining to feed prisoners well. This was their baseline, their minimum acceptable standard. They literally didn't know how to operate any differently. The emotional weight hit hardest during evening conversations. Prisoners compared notes on meals they'd consumed versus letters describing starvation back home. The guilt was overwhelming, but so was the dawning understanding. They weren't just prisoners of war, they were witnesses to a completely different kind of civilization. 3 months into captivity, Colonel Battista experienced his psychological collapse on a Tuesday morning over pancakes. The mess hall served stacks of fluffy pancakes with real maple syrup, butter, and fresh strawberries. As he cut into the golden stack, steam rising from the warm bread, he began crying uncontrollably. "I cannot eat this," he told the camp interpreter. "My daughters are starving, and I am being served food they have never imagined. How can I swallow what they cannot have?" But he did swallow it, and more. The human body's survival instincts overrode emotional conflict. Battista gained 47 pounds during his first 6 months in American captivity, the healthiest he'd been since adolescence. His letters home became increasingly difficult to write. Here's what they never saw coming. The breaking point wasn't brutality or deprivation, it was kindness beyond comprehension. Guards like Corporal Patterson treated Italian prisoners as temporary guests rather than dangerous enemies. "You boys eat up now," Patterson would say, serving second helpings. "My mum always said nobody thinks straight on an empty stomach." Diary entries from multiple prisoners reveal the same psychological pattern. Initial suspicion, growing amazement, then crushing guilt, followed by reluctant acceptance, and finally desperate hope. Private Salvatore wrote, "I dream now of bringing my family to this place where food grows on trees and milk flows like rivers. Is this what paradise was supposed to be?" The camp commander, Colonel William Hayes, noticed the psychological transformation. In a report to Washington, he wrote, "Italian prisoners are experiencing severe emotional distress, not from poor treatment, but from treatment far exceeding anything they've known. We may be unintentionally creating a propaganda problem in reverse." But wait, it gets worse. Medical examinations revealed that Italian POWs were achieving better health metrics in American camps than they'd maintained as free soldiers in the Italian army. Better nutrition, regular medical care, dental work, they were being healed by captivity. The final straw came when prisoners learned about care packages. American Red Cross volunteers were organizing care packages for Italian families back home. Enemy prisoners were being fed abundance while Americans organized charity for their starving relatives. The moral complexity broke several men completely. Word spread through the international POW network. German prisoners in adjacent camps heard stories of Italian abundance and refused to believe them. Propaganda, declared Hans Müller, a captured Luftwaffe pilot. No nation feeds its enemies better than its own people. Then Müller saw the ice cream truck. Quick succession of shattered beliefs. British POWs in Japanese camps heard rumours through Red Cross communications. French prisoners under German control received letters describing American abundance. The news rippled through underground networks. America was feeding enemy soldiers better than most Allied civilians were eating. The reaction from Rome was swift and panicked. Italian intelligence services instructed families to stop writing detailed letters about food shortages. Military leadership feared that news of American abundance would devastate home front morale. Too late. Letters had already circulated. Camp psychiatrist Dr. Sarah Mitchell documented the cascade effect in her monthly reports. Prisoners are experiencing collective cognitive dissonance. Everything they believed about American industrial capacity, military sustainability, and social organization has been disproven by daily meals. The psychological impact extends beyond individual prisoners to their entire worldview. German intelligence intercepted some Italian POW correspondence and initially dismissed it as American disinformation. The descriptions were too extreme to be credible. No nation could sustain such abundance during wartime. Then German prisoners began reporting similar experiences. The human drama. Families throughout occupied Europe began questioning their leaders' assurances about American weakness. If America could feed prisoners luxuriously while fighting globally, what did that suggest about eventual war outcomes? Civilian morale began shifting based on POW meal descriptions. By late 1943, Italian military leadership recognized they faced a propaganda disaster of unprecedented scope. Their captured soldiers were inadvertently becoming advertisements for American superiority. Emergency directives prohibited detailed food descriptions in prisoner correspondence. Too late. The psychological damage was done. Colonel Battista's transformation from confident enemy officer to reluctant American admirer represented thousands of similar cases. Letters home had already seeded doubt about Italian leadership's competence and honesty. The tactical implications were staggering. If America could maintain such abundance while fighting a global war, their industrial capacity exceeded all European calculations. Previous intelligence estimates were clearly fantasy. Military strategists began quietly revising assessments of American capabilities. Technical analysis made accessible. America's food production exceeded military needs by margins that made European rationing look like organizational failure rather than wartime necessity. While Italian citizens survived on 2,100 calories daily, America was casually feeding prisoners 3,000 calories and considering it standard procedure. The strategic shift became clear. This wasn't a war between equivalent industrial powers. This was a conflict between European scarcity economics and American abundance economics. The outcome was predetermined by baseline conditions rather than military strategy. Italian commanders began receiving disturbing reports from the homeland. Civilian populations were asking why prisoners were eating better than families of serving soldiers. The propaganda war was being lost one hamburger at a time. Here's what broke their final resistance. Camp inspectors from the International Red Cross documented American POW feeding standards and published reports. The international community learned that America was treating enemy prisoners better than most Allied nations were treating their own civilians. This wasn't brutality. It was humanity on an impossible scale. Christmas Day, 1943. Camp Atterbury Mess Hall served Italian prisoners a feast that exceeded anything they'd experienced during peacetime. Roasted turkey with stuffing, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes with gravy, green bean casserole, fresh bread rolls, and pumpkin pie with vanilla ice cream. Colonel Battista sat staring at his loaded plate, no longer capable of surprise but still processing the implications. In his final letter as a proud Italian officer, he wrote, "Eleanor, I must tell you something that breaks my heart and opens my eyes. We were wrong about everything. not just military strategy. Everything. These people live in a world we couldn't imagine, and they shared it with us without thinking twice. The moment of complete realization came during evening conversation with Corporal Patterson, who was complaining about his girlfriend's cooking. "She can't make a decent hamburger to save her life," Patterson grumbled, unwrapping a care package that contained cookies, candy, and canned goods worth more than most Italian families saw in months. Batista finally understood. America's casual abundance was so fundamental that its citizens took luxuries for granted and complained about their quality, rather than celebrating their existence. This was a civilization operating from completely different baseline assumptions about what life should provide. The character transformation. From confident European superiority to humble acceptance of a larger truth. Batista wrote, "We thought we were fighting for national honor. We were actually fighting against the future itself. These people have already won because they've created something we never imagined possible." The final desperate attempts at resistance came from Rome's propaganda ministry, which instructed prisoner families to ignore exaggerated reports about American conditions. Italian prisoners were ordered to minimize food descriptions in letters home. The orders were universally ignored. Truth was more powerful than military discipline. Private Salvatore's last letter to Sicily captured the complete psychological surrender. "Mama, I am going to ask to stay in America when the war ends. Not because I am a traitor, but because I have seen what life can be. They have shown us tomorrow, and I cannot go back to yesterday." Post-war testimony. In 1946, Colonel Batista testified before a congressional committee studying POW treatment. His words entered the official record. "You defeated us with kindness we couldn't comprehend. Every hamburger was proof that our leaders had lied about your capabilities. Every milkshake was evidence that our economic theories were fantasy. Of the 51,156 Italian POWs held in America, over 12,000 applied for permanent residency after the war. The highest application rate came from camps with the best food service. Giuseppe Romano, the mathematics teacher, eventually opened a restaurant in Cleveland serving American-Italian fusion. Hamburgers with marinara sauce. Statistical summary of the gap. America spent more money feeding Italian prisoners annually, $47 million in 1943 dollars, than Italy's entire pre-war military budget. The calories provided to POWs exceeded the total caloric intake of Rome's civilian population. This wasn't generosity. It was standard operating procedure revealing impossible abundance. One profound quote showing complete mindset shift. Sergeant Rinaldi, interviewed in 1987 at age 78, summarized the experience. "We went to war believing in European civilization's superiority. We came home understanding that America had quietly created something beyond our comprehension. The hamburgers weren't just food. They were proof that everything we thought we knew about power was wrong. Universal truth about industrial warfare." Military victory follows economic reality. America didn't win because of superior strategy or tactics. They won because abundance defeats scarcity every time. Their civilian baseline exceeded most nations' wartime maximums. Modern relevance. Today's global economic competition follows the same pattern. Nations that achieve baseline abundance for their populations don't just compete. They define what competition means. The hamburger principle still applies. Whoever can treat luxuries as standard operating procedure usually wins. The bridge forward. This story connects to America's Cold War strategy, space program funding, and modern technological dominance. Understanding abundance economics explains why certain nations consistently exceed expectations, while others struggle to meet minimum requirements. The pattern established in those POW camps continues shaping global power dynamics today. But that's a story for another video about how ice cream became America's secret weapon against the Soviet Union.